This is a very trivial question I would like to begin with. Why shall we keep all the information at all? It's very trivial, and some of the answers are also trivial, but we must be aware of the very basic reasons why we are doing the whole job. The whole job of archiving, providing access to information. Of course, this is the basis of our identity in a range of levels, on an individual level, family level, group level, societal level, national and global level. But there are other reasons too. That's this one. Because these kind of old information is necessary for conducting our daily life. Also necessary to keep organizations operating, any kind of organizations. It is also important to make regimes accountable, to keep them accountable, any kind of regimes, but especially political or social or state-owned regimes. Also important for inheriting culture, and it's a basic, it's a basis of remembering our personal past. But here, only in brackets or in a footnote, I would like to ask a question. If we have a right to know, if we have an obligation to keep all the information, do we also have a right to be forgotten? The reason why I'm asking this question, because in Europe, a new regulation is being created, and most probably next year it will be effective, which will provide individuals only, private individuals, a right to be forgotten and to erasure. But that's the other part of the same coin. We are going to talk about preserving and remembering. And of course, there are a lot of other reasons why we should keep all the information. But we are living under a tyranny of the present. Even if we are archivists, partly in this room, we must see that the new generation and the present life is under a kind of tyranny of the present, especially on the internet. The internet users know that old and new information look the same. You cannot distinguish. Sometimes the style of the website can give you some advice, but otherwise it looks the same. And users, internet users, especially the young generation, they are not interested in the past. That's my personal view. In general, I would say they are not interested in the future either. They are living in the present. What's online, what's available, that's life. And if they need something from ancient times like last year or something, they can easily find it on the internet. And what will happen, they will organize through the mobile equipments what we all have it with us. And of course, on the internet, everything seems to be stored permanently, but it's not the case. If you are doing research on the internet, and it's possible to do research, serious research online, then you can see that many URLs, many internet addresses are broken and so on. So it's not stored permanently, except for a few initiatives. NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They are also living in a present continuous tense, I would say. If you are from the civil sector, you know that you don't have time and energy to deal with last year's documents or your yesterday's paper, so to say, because you are in your next project and you cannot afford the luxury of wasting time of documenting something which is in the past. And generally, these organizations have no resources to archive information, and I would add sometimes no expertise either. But anyhow, they are not inclined to do so. And finally, government offices, they are also overburdened with present tasks. The tasks of the day, routines, and if they comply with the hopefully existing access to information norms and provisions, then they have to serve the requesters with current information, and they are very, very happy if they can get rid of the old information and old documents, and they can push it, they can transfer it to archives, in case if they have not destroyed it earlier. So that's a burden. We all know. We all know that this is a burden. So how can we deal with this problem? That we need to keep the old information, but the present time is really pressing us. We simply outsource. We outsource this task, so to say, in a societal level. We outsource the remembering, the preserving of documents and information and data to specialized institutions. These are the three most well-known institutions. In most cases, they are public institutions nowadays, which preserve memory and which can preserve the carriers of memory, documents, and any other forms of recorded information. Museums, libraries, and archives. Can you say some more specialized memory preserving institutions? You certainly know some, which are specialized to preserve memory, and not libraries, not. For example, cemeteries, in a different way, or memorial parks. And I would even add universities, although they also create new information, but one of their basic tasks is to preserve information and to forward it to the students, and also religious organizations, churches, and so on. All are created for preserving and sometimes making available information. But what's the difference? It's easy to, for the layman, it's easy to distinguish museums, libraries, and archives, because museums generally collect objects. Libraries collect books, archives collect documents, but it's not the full picture. At the first level, it's okay. We can live with this distinction, but in museums you can find, for example, letters from important persons whose heritage is kept in museums. And I'm not talking about for example, the British Museum's really excellent clay documents collection, which is really impressive, from the ancient East. In some libraries, you can have an important manuscript collection from the Middle Ages till yesterday. And in some archives, besides the documents, they have some artifacts, and that's why I wanted to show you if the internet connection is working, and perhaps it's working. But I can't see my cursor. It's there. That's the website of the Open Society Archives. You can see that it looks like the metro map of London or some other countries. Archives are sometimes, it's a very irregular type of archive, I must say. They have a lot of things besides the documents. For example, we collect the mimeographs and silk screens, some primitive machines on which the banned publications, which in a kind of Russian word is called samizdat, that's the kind of underground banned publications in dictatorship. But in an extended meaning, I think that the pirate radio stations or the censored, let's say, Chinese internet sites also belong to this kind of samizdat word. Okay, so we will talk about archives today, and in the next day also mostly about archives and records, repositories, and some similar parts, and not about cemeteries or others. But in cemeteries also you can find some poems carved on the stones and so on. So the vision is not that clear. But what is the difference between, for example, an archive and a library? For most of you, it's evident. But for the lay user, it's not always evident. And we must serve, nowadays, the lay users too. Not only professionals or scholars or officials. In an archives, in a library, every item is self-explaining. It has a title, it has an author, it has a publisher, a date of publication, table of contents, references. So if you happen to get a book in an open shelf system, you immediately know what is it about. But if you go to an archives and you happen to read a piece of paper, like this, for example, and if you don't know who created it, when, where, in connection of what, you are lost. So you need somebody, and that's the archivist, who, before giving you this document, process the documents. And this is the most painful and most time-consuming process in all archives, the processing. Of course, you can process books also. You can describe books. You can also set up a catalog in libraries. But in archives, before setting up the catalog, the finding is you must process the document, keep them together, establish the contacts, and so on. So that's one of the biggest differences. Also, what is the difference between an archive and a documentation center? In the civil sector, documentation centers are very fashionable and very useful. But there is a great difference between them, between the two. For example, a collection of documents and publications on a certain topic. For example, the ecology of the region. That could be the subject of a documentation center. Very useful for several purposes. But an archive would concentrate on preserving the integrity of the documentary heritage of an entity, an organization, or a family, or an individual, not just collecting documents on a topic. So it's a different logic. And what's the difference between an archive and Google, let's say, the online available information? Because for the young generation, Googling, that's the most important source of doing research. So to say doing research means the first 10 hits of Google. But what's the difference? In the archive, you can find structured descriptions, whilst if you search by search engines, you will have a lot of documents. You cannot really see the relevance, although there are some experiments how to enhance the relevance of your hits in different reasons. And perhaps some of you have already heard this special phenomenon, which is called the filter bubble. Have you heard about this? Anybody from the? No. That's. I would really encourage you to see at least a short video in an American infotainment site, which is called TED, Technology, Entertainment, Design. And the author, who is called Eli Pariser, who wrote a bestseller on this, tells you the story in less than 10 minutes, so it's very enlightening. Filter bubble means that you might think that the world is opening because you have access to the internet. Just the opposite. The world is closing down on you because the search engines, and that's why I wrote this here, the search engines record your previous searches, your habits. They want to serve you, so to say. If you wanted this one, next time you will get the same, and all the people like the same, so you will get something which is custom tailored on you. And if Eduardo would search something on his laptop, and if I put the same question, we will see a different word. So we will see a filtered word, and it's not an archive. So it's very interesting, and it's very difficult how to get out of this bubble. But let me go further. What is an archive? Natalia already mentioned the problems in defining the word archives. So if we talk about archives today and tomorrow, we should be aware what we are talking about. In some countries, yes, you were right, in some countries, it means all kinds of documents, current document, semi-current, and non-current document. Current document is what we are using today. For example, it's current document for this. It will be semi-current, let's say 2 years from now when the project has been closed, but you can still use it for certain purposes, or you have a contract with somebody, a subcontractor, and if there's a legal dispute, then you may perhaps need these documents. And the non-current is what you keep it for some purpose, for historical purposes, but not use it anymore. In some other countries, only non-current information comprises the world of archives. And again, in other countries, only documents already transferred somewhere, transferred from your institution to an archive. That's what they call archives, especially in Europe. To make order in this world, the Council of Europe, which is a pan-European organization, it's not the European Union, which has now 27 countries. Council of Europe has 48, perhaps, member states, and concentrates on rights and culture, in short. So there's a recommendation on access to archives by the Council of Europe. Perhaps some of you already know that. It was perhaps the first and only international standard, although it's only a recommendation, on access to archives. If archives is written with a lowercase a, that means the totality of documents produced by a single organization or a person. So not the totality of the documents of the world, but the totality of the documents created by an entity. And archives written with an uppercase A, this means the institution which is in charge with the preservation of the lowercase archives. So unfortunately, we don't use it in a consistent way, but otherwise, if we are talking about archives as institutions, like the archives of the ministry, it should be written with uppercase A, not only the name, but the archives as such, and the archives inside, the archivists often call it the fond, which is the basic unit of archives. That's the archives in lowercase. The role of the archives is changing. The roles are changing. We all are witness of this process. But there are some permanent elements and there are some changing elements. It depends on your style and vision of the archival world, whether you emphasize the permanent elements. For example, the functions of documents, the types of documents are the same. Some people even say that the ancient inventories in the ancient East, carved in clay, has the same function as the modern business papers today, or the inventories. And also the preservation. It's one of the basic functions of archives, the processing and so on. So it seems to be that archives are forever. Archives are eternal. But there are changing elements also. Very pressing changes. The functions and type of archives themselves is different. The primary purposes of the archives nowadays are very different from the, let's say, the late 19th or 18th century archives. The target audience is changing very quickly. It's, for example, today you must deal with lay audience who wants to access your documents or the information contained in the documents through electronic channels, through the internet. And the technology is also changing. So, what is stronger? What can we see? Continuity or paradigm shifts? I opt for the paradigm shifts because I think that we have a kind of cultural myopia, a short-sightedness, that we tend to think that the past is all the same. The past is a single unit, and the paradigm shift can happen only today. And let's say 50 years from now, people tend to think that the past is a single unit and the paradigm shift or the revolution is there. No, I don't think. And you know that documents may have an interesting story. But archives and archiving has also have history. And this history is full of changes in almost all aspects of archiving. The ownership, who owns the archives? What is the main function of the archives? Who is the target audience? The users of the archives? Who are the key professionals in the archives? Nowadays, perhaps the IT professionals. In old times, it was the writer who could write and read. Also, the impact, the problems, even the informational operators. If there are information managers, those people who are trained in information management in the room, you can see that the informational operations done in the archives are changing. So please don't be afraid. I will show you a very complicated table, but we will have no time and no, in the next slide, and no intention to go into details and analyze everything. But the four paradigms, in my understanding, in the whole history of archives are the following. The first one, perhaps the name is a bit complicated, entitlement attestation archival paradigm, when the main function of the archives was to prove the titles of the rulers and so on. The second one, which emerged around the late 18th century, let's say around the Great French Revolution, that was the national archival paradigm. The third one emerged after the Second World War, especially in the US. That's the public paradigm. And nowadays, the emerging paradigm is the global paradigm. And here comes the complicated table. And I'm not sure you can read the fields at all. But let me highlight just a few elements. You can see the four paradigms in the subsequent rows. And you can see the most important elements, like, for example, in the first paradigm, the primary purpose was proving titles, properties, power, origin. The key institution was, of course, the private archives. There were no public archives at all in the ancient East. The owner was naturally the creator, who was the ruler, most probably. And the users, or the target audience, was nothing else but the ruler himself or his officers. Key technology was writing, key professional was a writer, and if you deal with informational operations, then recording, that's the only element which you cannot find in the other rows. Plus coding and storing. Coding means writing, recording the information, and storing. Of course, storing, that's the basic function of archives today too. And the impact of all this was a very strong secrecy. And of course, there were some key problems I have not listed here. For example, the vulnerability of the archives. It was very easy to burn archives. You could erase the memory of a certain community, or at least the basic functioning, if you manage to burn down the archives. Okay, in the national paradigm, the nation states and the nations invented something, a new role, that they have a role in preserving collective memory, the memory of the nations, and they started to promote historical scholarship. Of course, the key institution was the public archives. The owner was the state. Public archives, national archives in modern democracies are owned by the state. I know some countries in the world where the central archives of the country is owned a single person, the president or the king or the ruler, but in modern democracies, the owner is the state. And there are some new technologies like meta information, catalogs, finding aids, publications of sources, the professionals who had been using this or have still be using these catalogs are the scholars or the bureaucrats or the politicians and so on. This was a period, the archivist colleagues know, that the document concentration and restructuring took place. And of course, there were very important problems. For example, how to keep context if you rearrange something which came from different organic archives. The public archives means that the main purpose is openness, serving the public, and this was the time when the public reading rooms were opened and the lay users, so to say, invaded the archives, but they appeared in the archives, and a lot of outreach programs like exhibitions and all other things began in the archives. And the key professional in this paradigm is the archivist. The archivist, which is not a scholar, and he is not a records manager, he is the archivist, and the profession of archivism, or archivistics, rather, emerged in this paradigm. And the global paradigm is something new. Some people say, not in all systems, that the main purpose is global access. The key institution is not the public archives or open private archives, but service providers who are kind of mediators between us as users and mediating with us, if we think ourselves as archivists, on the other side. The owner, a layman may think that there's no owner, it's free, it's on the internet. Internet is free, it's a, so to say, charitable organization of public utility, which is not the case, but that's the concept of the users. And of course, the key technologies, computer and internet, and the IT professional or information broker, that's the key person. And of course, there are some promises like we should keep everything forever, we should digitize, you know it better than me. So let's go back to the four paradigms. And you might think that we are already living in the global archival paradigm, but it's not true. We are living on the borderline of the public archives, and we would be very happy if we could fulfill all the functions of the public archival paradigm, but we are proceeding to the new paradigm, that's the global one. On the borderline of public and global, there are some well-known characteristics. I'm sure you know it much better than I do, that there is a certain convergence of records and archives. I will get back to this a bit later. Perhaps not strong enough, but there's a certain convergence. We must live together with paper-based, digitized, and electronic documents. Electronic documents are the born electronic documents, emails or documents which are created in electronic forms, and digitized is paper-based documents which we scan or digitize or photograph and convert it, as you know it. We must deal with lay users who are not educated in archival terminology. They don't like to use complicated finding aids. What they want is remote access. They want to have access to the archives from their bedrooms, and we must somehow deal with this situation. There is a certain convergence of Archives Act and information law, perhaps not so strong, not strong enough in my understanding, but there is some convergence and we should push this convergence further. And there's a shift from document-centric legal approach to a data-centric approach. Just to give you an example. For example, in secrecy acts, secrecy regulations, and in this sense, secrecy is an exception. If we accept the general rule of openness, that all public information belong to the public, except for a few secrets, which also part of the realm of public information, but whose accessibility is restricted on legal grounds for a limited time, for a limited scope, in a limited scope. But they will immediately return to the pool of publicly available information if the deadline expires or a civil organization like the National Security Archives manages to dig out from the hands of the secret services on legal grounds, of course. So in the secrecy regulation, the subject of secrecy, the subject of national secrets, let's say, is not the document, but the information or the recorded information, that means the data included in the documents. Although the stamp is put on the document, if we are talking about paper-based documents, and it seems that the document itself is classified, but in reality is the information which is inside the document that's classified. And in some countries, when you have a rule of partial access, which is very useful sometimes, but many people, including archivists, many people, including journalists, don't know that well enough. There is a provision which makes obligatory for the organization in possession of the document to separate those parts which contain the real subject of secret, the real information, and release the rest. And of course, archivists simply hate this provision because, first of all, it's work for them. Secondly, it's responsibility, and some other reasons. And what if they don't separate well enough the lawful secrets and the rest? That's what the National Security Archives, for example, is using extensively. If there's a little difference between how one organization sanitizes the documents and the other, you can put together as a mosaic, and you can have access to the secret information. But all that kind of secrecy must be based on the data or the information and not the document, which are sometimes so thick, and it's very easy to put a stamp on this, and you don't have to deal with this. Everybody can be sent away. In general, there are two types of information which are preserved in archives. We are dealing today and tomorrow only with one of the two. But these are the two main information. One is personal data, and here I must say that I'm following the European approach, and I suggest you also to follow the European approach because this is slowly beginning to be the global standard. We are very, very far from this. In the European approach, personal data means any kind of data, any kind of recorded information which can be related to a living individual. So not only personal because it's intimate, not only personal because it's sensitive, any kind of information. It's a value-neutral term. So for example, Buenos Aires is not a personal information per se, but for example, my present place of staying is Buenos Aires. It's my personal information. But if I'm not identified, my name is Ivan. What kind of Ivan? Ivan the Terrible from the Russian history. What kind of Ivan? So you must identify somebody, and you must establish a connection between the data and the person. Then that's personal data. And in Latin America, that's why I wrote their habeas data, which is a very high-level acknowledgement of your right over your data. But in a European conference, I would have written their informational self-determination, or in other regimes, I would have written like protection of personal data. But that's one part of the picture. What's in between? Data which are formally personal because they can be connected to a person, identified person, but as a main rule, they are open to the public. And that relates to all the data related to a public official's public activity, not the private life of the public officials, but what they do in their official capacity. They are formally personal data, but subject to openness. Of course, there are some exceptions. For example, national security secrets should be somewhere there. And what we are talking about is this part, including the personal data of public officials, and of course the whole realm of publicly, in theory, publicly accessible data, how to make them, the documents containing such data, how to make them available to the public. And these data are subject to a lot of existing regulations and legislations. For example, ATI means access to information laws, or FOI in English means freedom of information in some countries, but also subject to secrecy law, also subject to media law. They are all overlapping. EFOIAs, that means Electronic Freedom of Information Acts in some countries where such organizations are obliged to post something actively on the internet, and so on. I would like to say a few words about archives and records management, or archivists and records managers. Although there is a certain convergence between the two professions, let's say that archives are dealing with old, non-current information, records managers are dealing with current information inside the originating agency. But they have different traditions, different even language, training, professional associations, especially in the US. It's two words, they don't mix. They have different skills, they need different skills, different literature, specialized forums, including journals. If you go to a library and see the records management journals and the archival science journals, they are rather different, and different scientific approaches. And the legislation and regulation, unfortunately, is still different for the two. So the big question is, can they converge the two professions? Because everything seems to press them to converge the two professions, technology, the pace of life, and so on. I think it's possible to a certain extent, but I don't think that the two traditions will merge. And I must confess that it's sometimes it's very useful if a profession has a tradition. So we don't need to abolish all the traditions of, let's say, the records manager and merge them into the archival world. No, it's important to keep the traditions. But we can converge, or the two professions could converge at the level of policies, at the level of accessibility. That's our main topic for the 2 days. Also, at the level of information management, that's not record management, but how to manage the flow of information and access to information. Also, it's evident that information technology should not be different in one place and the other, and even law. And the reason why I'm showing to you is this. Nowadays, there's a very dangerous gap between records managers and archives. So in terms of accessibility, let's say, of course, it's a very abstract chart. There's a certain level of accessibility to documents and data and information in general, while it's in the hands of records managers. That means that it's in the originating agency. Then comes a point where these documents will be transferred to an archives, uppercase A, an archive. And immediately the accessibility of documents disappear for certain reasons. And there's a long time through the processing while these documents become again accessible. And what's the reason for this? There are several reasons, besides the traditions and all other reasons. First, in some countries, there is a so-called general closure period. So if documents are transferred to an archives, there will be subject to a general closure period. In the most fashionable period is 30 years. So it's possible that if a document is accessible at an agency, the agency will be very obedient to transfer it to an archive. Well, it will be buried for the next 30 years, and it will be easier for the organization if it's sensitive for the organization and they don't want to release it. So this is one kind, of course, I do hope that it's not the case, but it's a theoretical possibility. In archives, as we talked about, processing is a basic function. If they have no energy, no time for processing the information, then they can say it would be accessible, it would remain accessible. For example, it was accessible under the Freedom of Information Act. Now it goes to an archives. It would be accessible, but unfortunately, we could not process the information, so it's still in boxes, and so we cannot give it to you. Or even if the archives have already processed the material, they have not yet created catalogs or finding aids. So it's processed, but unfortunately you cannot search in this because the finding aids are not ready. And they have no resources to serve the researchers, even if the catalogs are there. And archives, especially uppercase archives, are always underfinanced, so it's possible. So just to show you some examples of the general closure period in Europe, where I'm most aware of the situation. It's from a book perhaps some of you already know. That's the Handbook on Access to Archives. It's about the Council of Europe's recommendation and some colorful maps like this. For example, you can see that in one part of Europe, the green part, there's no general closure period. But of course, it doesn't mean that everything is open from the first moment, but they solve it in another way. This kind of lilac type countries, the general closure period is 30 years, and the maximum is 100 years, which is perhaps at that time it's about 8 years old data. It was, I think, it's Belgium. I can't see well the colors, but perhaps this one. But it's not the only thing which may hinder the access. There are some countries in Europe, and I'm sure that the same is in Latin America, that even in the same countries, the access provisions are not the same. They are not uniform, they are different. It's very understandable in countries countries which consist of different member states. For example, that's the case in the UK, not to speak about Switzerland, which is composed of I don't know how many cantons. They have all different regulations. So if a researcher, not only in terms of serious scholarly researchers, the user has access to the same document in one archive, in one canton of Switzerland, he would not have access to the same document in another one. And it's the same in Spain, because in different territories, in Catalonia and in the mainland Spain, the rules are not uniform. And there are, at another level, there are other differences that in the same country, even if the rules are similar, there are some institutions which are exempt from the general rules. For example, ministries, or in the eastern part of Europe where I'm from, there was a special kind of archives on which collected the documents relating to the former secret services of the dictatorship and so on. So they have different rules. So the researchers or the user's life is not easy, even if there is no gap between records management and archives. And finally, a few words about the challenges of the information society which we are living in today. First of all, there are bright, rosy promises of the information technology, the new and the emerging. Please don't mix up the two. The new technology, we all have new technology here. It's all in your pocket or on the table. But there are emerging technologies which are not yet here, but you can bet they will be here in a few years because we see how they are developing. So altogether, they promise us that all information will be stored for eternity and will be accessible anywhere and anytime. They envision that the information will be revolting around the world like a kind of invisible public utility, and you can just what you need is just to tap this kind of rich information. So, but just in brackets, if that is true, how can it be that Google and Facebook sometimes lose millions of documents and data? But even if it will be the future, we face a very fundamental question. If all information will be accessible, it will be stored forever, do we still need archives or archival institution at all? My answer is yes, but some postmodernist theorists say that no, you know, the whole life is an archive, everybody is an archivist of his or her own life, and the archives as institutions are but a mere transitional state of human history and things like that. I don't think that's the truth, but these are important and interesting theories. Another challenge: shall we preserve everything, or shall we keep on selecting and destroying sometimes documents and information? In the archival terminology, it's called appraisal. That's the appraisal process. But we have more and more information, more and more documents, and if you look at the development of the whole archival science or archival theory, you can clearly see the responses of these theorists to the growing number of documents, from Jenkinson through Schellenberg to the postmodernist archival theorists. They try to handle this situation, the ever-growing amount of documents. And how can we deal with this? Because if we select, it requires evaluation, kind of responsibility. Not easy to judge the needs of future researchers, future users, responsibility, resources, expertise. And if I know that some of you have already taken some photographs in this room, but we are taking much more during these days in Buenos Aires. And we generally don't have time to select the good photos. We keep the 1,000 bad or different photos on a computer, thinking that once I will have time and I will select, I will never have time to select. So I keep everything, and I still may trust in a future technology which will help me to select the good ones from the bad ones. But it's expensive, time-consuming, and storage is so cheap. So there's a temptation to keep everything. But if you keep everything, if you preserve everything, how can you process and describe everything? Of course, it's impossible, even in the case of the archives. But just a line at the bottom. The most important thing, not to destroy information of permanent value. Sometimes it's not easy to decide what kind of information is of permanent value, but sometimes certain kinds of organizations tend to destroy information which may have an adverse effect on their operation in the future. So even if you don't keep everything, all the bad draft of your letters and so on, but be careful not to destroy information of permanent value. But let's get back to the question, how can you process and describe everything? The new promise is, let's outsource it again. So first we outsource the basic process of preserving and processing and making available information in specialized institutions. Now the specialized institutions want to outsource again this task because it's immense to the general public, to the users, and that's the buzzword is tagging. Tagging what you use in Facebook and in all social networks. Tag and describe and comment and so on. It's very appealing because you outsource the workload and you involve your users. But in reality, there are some important questions. How can you urge users to tag and to describe and upload and comment and work for you? And even if they do, how can you control the quality? It will never be the same as if you yourself as an archivist will describe, even with a long delay, a big backlog with your work, but in some, at least in my idea, tagging may be very useful, but it can never fully replace processing and creating finding aids. But you can use tagging, you can outsource this workload partly because it may add something new. It may have an added value, and interesting and important new layers can be found through the secondary layer of context. But it will not solve the whole set of problems. Another well-known dilemma, shall we digitize everything? It's very tempting, very cheap, storage places cheaper and cheaper. Shall we digitize everything? In my opinion, in paper-based archives, when most of the documents are still on paper, it would be a complete waste of time and energy. Instead, I would recommend you first to define priorities and digitize the most important things, which may be important for the world, for you, for the users, for the civil society. Then digitize in the second step on demand. If you discover that users are demanding something which has not yet been digitized, digitize then and offer them. You can also use inter-archival system. Don't digitize again if the same document can be found elsewhere and it has already been digitized. Just try to cooperate with them and in general follow the researcher's interest. And please don't think that digitization will solve all the problems. It will solve certain problems, but it will create immediately other kinds of problems, like all information technology. The techno-optimism, the usual techno-optimism, and I'm also teaching at the University of Technology, maybe Eduardo mentioned it, so I know the mindset of the would-be IT people. They absolutely trust in technology, that technology will solve human and social problems. It will solve certain problems and immediately create other ones. The other ones in the archival world is, for example, the permanent or long-term storage. We don't need, perhaps in the next 2 days, we will have some time to go into details. How can you preserve today's digitized documents tomorrow? Because tomorrow you will have to preserve yesterday's and today's paper, and so it's a cumulative process. And of course you must migrate, or you must find some solutions to keep not only the information but also the content unchanged, or at least you must be aware of the changes. Well, the same is here. Shall we make everything available online? Shall we post everything on the internet? That's the sister question of the first one. And my suggestions are very similar. Define priorities and start posting these important documents, digitized documents, on the internet first. Then, if the demand for remote access grows, then follow this demand and post one by one or group by group these documents. And don't try to flood the internet with unimportant documents. You can also use inter-archival systems. There are some which are already operational, so you can have access to other archives, properly described, properly metadata attached holdings on the internet. So don't duplicate efforts if possible, and again follow researchers' interest. The last few slides. Our needs at the present and in the future. I'm absolutely convinced that we need more harmonized policies and regulation than today we have. And it's understandable because these regulations and regulatory traditions have developed under different historical lines. So we must understand that. But now we are at a level where we can harmonize much stronger than before these two realms, the current documents and the archives. Also, we need standardized and harmonized information processing. So irrespectively of the legal status of someone, the information contained in the document, the best example is the gap. When you push something into the archive, it will lose its accessibility. Of course, IT strategy must also be standardized, and there's a need for dialogue between the sources of information, the originating agencies, the records managers, and the archivists. What is the role of the academics in this process? They should work out legal concepts and solutions. That's the role of the legal scholars. They should also work out common standards of information processing. That's a different profession. Also, they should develop standardized IT strategies. That's closer to the present-day IT specialists' work. And they also need to develop a common theoretical framework for archiving and records management, because there are some initiatives, but the comprehensive theories are still missing. The role of the civil sector, and that's the last one, the role of the civil sector. Many of you are from the civil sector, and I must say that I'm really impressed by the composition of this panel, not only in terms of countries, but in terms of the range of organizations who are represented here. So, the civil sector. You should moderate between lay users and the information sources, because you can raise your voice, you can make these voices, the lay public voices, heard. You should also reinforce demands for public information, which is not sometimes self-evident for archives and for records management or the originating agencies. You can also provide user feedback, because you are also users of archives or other information sources, so you can actively give feedback to the archives and the information handlers. And you should also catalyze the whole process of developing integrated access system. And please don't forget to document your own activities for future archives. So thank you very much. And that was the formal part of the presentation. And I'm open to any comments and suggestions and questions if I have one. And I think I will give it back to you, because I can use the other one if you have questions. Thank you very much.